we sped up the sourcing process with good technology for the shippers to collect proposals and analyze those proposals. But at the same time, I think we empowered them to act like bullies.
Welcome to Shipper Tech Talk. My name is Mike Mulqueen. I'm a strategy lead at JBF Consulting. In this series, we spotlight innovative logistics tech companies that are transforming freight logistics by introducing cutting-edge technology. As we close out 2024, from a truckload freight perspective, from a shipper perspective, it's been a pretty good year. Our shippers have seen very low rates. Diesel is down to $3 a gallon right now. Tender decline rates are about 5%. So it's been a very good year for shippers. You can't say the same on the carrier side. But we all know that the market, anybody that's been around transportation knows that the market's going to adjust. And expectations are first quarter, second quarter, sometime in 2025, we're going to see the market flip. And it's going to become more of a balanced market, if not perhaps a market that's better for the carrier side. So when that does happen, what should shippers be thinking about to mitigate the situations that occurred back in 2017 and 2021 when tender rejection rates went to 30, 40%. A lot of bad practices are hidden in times of excess capacity. So with that in mind, I had a great opportunity to speak with our friends at Leaf Logistics. And Leaf has some innovative and interesting thoughts in terms of how to actually go out and procure freight, how to change policies and practices to make their freight to make shippers' freight a little bit more attractive to shippers so that when the market does inevitably turn, our shippers are in a better position. So with that, let me introduce Jeff Ryan. Jeff is his title. It's rather whimsical, but his title is Utility Infielder at Leaf Logistics, and Bryan Schulte, who is Chief Data Janitor at Leaf Logistics. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Howdy. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having us.
So first question, for those not familiar with Leaf Logistics, maybe you can describe a little bit about your company and what you're doing.
Sure. I think first thing to note is that Jeff and I have been in one corner or another working around the problem of how truckload freight gets bought and sold in this country for 20 odd years. We helped build the first generation of electronic and then web-enabled RFP tooling that were the progenitors of the sorts of tools that folks use today to run their annual procurement processes. And so we've seen this market cycle play out 5, 6 times now, where when capacity is plentiful and you're a shipper, it's easy to get great rates. When the market flips again, we have tens of thousands of carriers, owner-operators going out of business. It's a horrible market cycle that exists right now, worsened by some of the tools we helped build way back in the day. And Jeff, do you want to talk a little about that?
Yeah, I'd say on one hand, we sped up the sourcing process with good technology for the shippers to collect proposals and analyze those proposals. But at the same time, I think we empowered them to act like bullies. They can put their requirements out in front of the carrier base and just ask for a price. And we didn't really spend, and the technology doesn't spend enough time asking the question, how can we run this business differently? So what we're finding is that shippers are introducing volatility into the way they interact with their carriers.
Jeff, can you expand on that? You say shippers are introducing volatility. Can you talk about what that means in practice?
Yes. If you want to take it to a typical procurement cycle, there's 3 steps to it. There's collecting the proposals, there's awarding the business, and then there's tendering the business the way you awarded it. What we get into in our analysis is the shippers, by spreading the business across multiple carriers and then not necessarily using a strict pattern to tender the business day to day. One carrier is seeing huge spikes on Monday and no volume on Tuesday. The other carrier is seeing huge spikes on Tuesday, no volume on Wednesday. And it just makes it difficult for them all to plan when sometimes there's a pretty reasonable lane that they're awarding with reasonable volume. But the way they're going about, again, awarding the volume and tendering the volume, it's making it worse than it needs to be. And the solution we have zeroes in on the lanes where that's happening most prolifically.
This is endemic to the entire procurement cycle, right? From the point where you decide what you're going to take to market, to the point where you run your bid event, to the point where you're managing. Folks will make decisions to say, hey, I'm going to look at as a shipper, when I take my volume out, I'm going to look at this as here's a lane from my manufacturing site to my DC, my manufacturing site to my customer's DC number one, customer two's DC. And these might all be 3 miles away from each other. We're going to treat them as kind of individual point-to-points and award them all separately with backup carriers. And that creates the situation Jeff was talking about, so that when you get into actually running that volume, the tools that you're using as a shipper to manage that ongoing, or looking at your TMS and saying, hey, am I seeing the tender acceptance that I expected? Am I complying with my routing guide? What does my spot usage look like? And those metrics will all tell you things are going great, things are going great, even as you're creating the situation Jeff was describing, where it's horribly difficult for a carrier to actually put reliable capacity to the volume that you're moving, so that when the market shifts and now spot is a bunch higher than the contract rates, there's a reason for them to go do something else with their capacity. And the solution that we've built really helps shine a light on where are the places that you, as the shipper, are doing things to make your capacity, to make your demand harder to serve from the capacity perspective, and what are the things that you can do to fix that, both as an early warning system for understanding where things have the potential to break before they do, but then also in terms of being able to set up what are those actions that you should take to go fix things.
Yeah. So it sounds like a shipper may have demand, if you look at it at a higher level, if you look at it at a city to city level, they may have relatively stable demand, but the way they're breaking down their routing guides, the way that they're defining lanes, is creating this, I would almost call it artificial variability. Is that a fair way to put it?
It absolutely is. And that the shipper can create artificial volatility by breaking their volume up just in terms of how they define the lanes, and then further exacerbate it by saying, okay, on each of these point-to-point lanes, I need to have 1 or 2 primary carriers and 1 or 2 backup carriers. And that, as Jeff was describing, takes a configuration of volume that might support 2-3 carriers in a nice, stable way. And by breaking it instead across 12-15 carriers, now nobody can see the benefit of any of that latent predictability that's actually there in the demand.
No, interesting. Is your solution, would you see that a use case, as in I think about this, I think about going to a bid process and defining what is a lane, right? Is your solution able to help my shippers define lanes that have enough volume that they're going to be interesting for my shipper to bid on, but not so transactional, point-to-point lanes, or is not yielding any benefit? In fact, it is causing more pain for my carriers because it is introducing this volatility.
Absolutely. And we call them power lanes. The construction of those power lanes is one of the first steps that our platform goes through when we take a look at shippers' data. The next thing is to be able to say, okay, with those power lanes in hand, how should you think about trying to contract that? It's one thing to say, hey, we're just going to run this through kind of the RFP play that we've run repeatedly over the last 20 years. But when you look at what the actual patterns of demand that we see on those lanes look like, you can begin to say, hey, we can actually take a look at procuring this on a different basis, right? So that instead of just having a single rate that we're going to plug into a routing guide, you can begin to have a conversation about what does it mean to make a commitment to forward buying some of this volume? Where are there places where the volume that I have as a shipper may line up with other shippers in a way that allows us to create a kind of cross-shipper corridor where we can create even more predictability than I as an individual shipper have, all the way to whereas can I as a shipper begin to coordinate the volume that I have with other shippers in a way that can support dedicated capacity put against that total configuration. And ultimately what we're trying to do is help our shipper customers walk down a journey toward constantly decreasing the volatility that they have to deal with from a cost and service perspective by taking more and more innovative approaches to how they attack that procurement problem.
The one thing I liked when you showed me the software, I called it the empathizer, because I think shippers are oftentimes ignorant of the pain that they're causing their carriers through this volatility, through increased deadhead time, as we're not giving our carrier partners visibility into what the volume is really going to be on a Monday. Sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 2. How do I position those assets if I'm a carrier? So I think that making sure that our shippers truly understand the economics of carrier freight, that was one of the things I really liked about your application, because it does truly show my shipper how much potential pain or value that they're providing to their carriers. So I think that's
there's occasionally referred to as the fundamental mystery of the supply chain, is that if you look upstream at how folks attack the sales and operations planning process, how production gets scheduled, there's volatility, right? There's seasonality inherent in how you choose to make or stock the stuff that you sell as a shipper. But when you look at the volatility of your inventory versus the volatility of how you ship that inventory out to your customers, that shipping volatility is so much crazier than what actually goes on in the fundamental underlying characteristics of the business. And the basic reason why that continues to be true after the last 25 years is that nobody's ever put a price tag on it. And that's one of the fundamental things that we're working toward, is really helping people to understand what are the cost and service implications of the way that you have chosen to procure and tender the freight that you have, so that you can make better decisions. It's not about being nice. It's about understanding what are the trade-offs that you're making by operating in the way you are, and then helping folks identify better ways to operate that set up a win with the carriers instead of constantly being at war with each other.
It's pretty exciting to see when a shipper sees the volatility they're creating, this artificial volatility, and they just, oh my God, what can I do differently about that? And they look at the lane we're talking to them about, and they realize it's a stock transfer lane, and they're shipping to themselves, and there's not even a customer on the lane that's driving some crazy behavior. They're making this product in their manufacturing centers, and they can move it whenever they want to the distribution centers. But we run into a lane that has 1,500 loads a year and no pattern, no planning, no predictability. That's something that's easily fixed. And it's rewarding to see the transportation person turn around and look upstream in the supply chain and say, hey, why are we doing this? Can I sacrifice a day of inventory in order to level load this transportation and make it easier on the carrier and save money and get better service? And they're actually fixing a problem, right? So it's not just the procurement process that they can influence. As Bryan mentioned, if you put a price tag on some of these behaviors, you can turn around and actually make some changes upstream.
Without a doubt. And one thing, I do like the power lane concept. And as we all know from forecasting, right, an individual forecast for an individual SKU, and let's call a lane a SKU, is going to be less accurate than an aggregated forecast, right? So we can wash out some of that variability by creating these power lanes. And I think truly by making shippers understand the impact that their practices have on their carriers and ultimately on their rates and how attractive their freight is, that's going to have the price tag. So I'm looking forward to actually getting some analytics from you guys in terms of organizations that have gone through this process and what their rates look like versus other organizations with similar networks that have not gone through this process and are still artificially increasing variability and volatility. Gentlemen, great conversation. Thank you so much. Is there a way that our audience can get in touch with you?
Yeah, they can reach out either through the website on the contact us page or write to Bryan or myself directly. And then actually the first step of working with us is pretty simple. If you share a set of shipment history data under NDA, of course, in the very first meeting, after we run that through Adept, which only takes a couple days, we'll be sitting there talking to you about some of these structural risks and maybe some of these cross-party, cross-shipper network opportunities that you might be able to get involved in down the road.
Fantastic. Jeff, Bryan, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it. Awesome solution. And we're looking to hear more from you guys in the future.
Very good.
Thanks Mike.
Thanks.